On certain days, history pauses, not with noise, but with silence. Today is one of those days. Across different worlds of influence, television, comedy, political commentary, and the arts, 4 American lives reached their final chapter. Their paths never crossed, yet each left an imprint that quietly shaped culture, conversation, and community. Some worked in front of cameras, others behind them. Some spoke through laughter, others through conviction or craft. None chased immortality, yet memory found them anyway. This hour is not about headlines or spectacle. It is about presence, the kind that lingers after voices fade. What follows is a moment of reflection, honoring lives lived in service to stories, ideas, and the human need to be understood. The news was confirmed quietly, without spectacle. On January 4, 2026, in Bel Air, California, Andy Friendly passed away. There were no flashing headlines, no breaking alerts that captured the public rush. For many, his name did not trend. Yet across newsrooms, studios, classrooms, and archival halls, the loss was felt deeply. This was the passing of someone whose life's work lived behind the lens, shaping what millions saw, trusted, and remembered. Andy Friendly was born Andrew Sampson Hiram Friendly on November 6, 1951, in New York City. He came of age in a time when television was becoming a national conscience. It was an era when journalism and storytelling carried weight, and credibility mattered more than speed. From the beginning, Friendly seemed drawn not to attention, but to structure, how stories were built, how voices were framed, and how truth could be protected within the noise. Those who worked with him often described him as steady. Not loud. Not performative. Steady. He understood that television was not only about what appeared on screen, but about the discipline behind it. Over the years, Friendly worked alongside some of the most influential figures in American media. Tom Snyder, Tim Russert, Dan Rather, Richard Pryor, Whoopi Goldberg. Each represented a different form of voice, yet Friendly's role remained consistent, to support, guide, and protect the integrity of what reached the public. A former colleague once reflected, Andy didn't chase the spotlight. He built the room so the light would fall where it mattered. It was a simple observation, but one that followed him throughout his career. As a producer, writer, and director, Friendly moved easily between journalism and entertainment. He understood that both demanded responsibility. In news, accuracy was sacred. In storytelling, context was everything. He believed audiences deserved respect, not manipulation. That belief became a quiet signature across the many programs he helped shape. His Emmy nomination was not a turning point, but a confirmation. By that time, Friendly had already established a reputation for trust. Networks relied on him not for spectacle, but for judgment. He was often placed in rooms where decisions mattered, about tone, ethics, and representation. He listened more than he spoke, and when he did speak, people paid attention. In later years, his focus turned increasingly toward memory and preservation. This commitment found its clearest expression in Liberation Heroes, The Last Eyewitnesses, which aired on Discovery in May 2019. The project documented first-hand accounts of Holocaust survivors, capturing voices that history was in danger of losing. For Friendly, this was not simply another production. It was responsibility made visible. A representative from the USC Shoah Foundation later shared, Andy understood urgency without panic. He knew time was fragile, and he treated every testimony as if it were sacred. That understanding guided his work on the project, which balanced restraint with emotional clarity. The series did not ask viewers to look away, nor did it overwhelm them. It allowed witnesses to speak, and it listened. Friendly's commitment to remembrance extended beyond the screen. He served on the board of counselors of the USC Shoah Foundation, lending his experience to the long work of historical preservation. In those spaces, he was not introduced by titles, but by trust. He helped shape how stories would be archived, protected, and shared for generations that would never meet the witnesses themselves. At the same time, Friendly remained deeply involved in community health and education. As a past president and ongoing board member of the Sabin Community Clinic, he supported access to care in underserved communities. The work was quiet, ongoing, and often unseen, much like his career. He believed impact did not need applause. Education, too, remained central to his life. Friendly returned to his alma mater, the USC School of Cinematic Arts, as an adjunct professor. In classrooms, he was not interested in producing stars. He focused on discipline, ethics, and responsibility. Students recall that he spoke often about what not to do, what shortcuts cost, and how credibility, once lost, never truly returns. One former student wrote online, "Andy taught us that storytelling is a form of stewardship. You borrow someone's truth, and you give it back carefully." For many, that lesson stayed long after technical skills faded. As television evolved, Friendly did not resist change, but he did question it. He was curious about new platforms, yet cautious about speed. He worried about voices being flattened, about history being reduced to content. His work became a counterbalance, proof that depth still mattered, even as attention spans shortened. When news of his passing spread through professional circles, the reactions were restrained but heavy. The news was confirmed quietly, without spectacle, as winter settled over the country. On December 29, 2025, John Mulrooney passed away, closing a life spent in dimly lit rooms where laughter did real work. There were no grand announcements, only the steady understanding that a familiar voice had gone silent. John Mulrooney's story did not begin on a stage built for stars. It began in Brooklyn, in working-class neighborhoods where humor was not a luxury, but a way to get through the day. The streets, the conversations, the small frustrations of ordinary life became his earliest material. He learned early how people spoke when they were tired, hopeful, or trying to hide worry behind a joke. Comedy, for Mulrooney, was never about volume. It was about noticing things others walked past. Friends from his early years often recalled how he listened more than he talked. One childhood friend later shared, "John didn't rush to be funny. He waited. Then he'd say something that made the whole room stop and laugh at the truth of it." In 1979, he stepped onto the stage at Pips Comedy Club in New York City. It was a raw era of stand-up, where comedy was shedding old forms and finding new voices. The rooms were small, the crowds unpredictable, and success was never promised. Mulrooney did not rely on big gestures or flashy delivery. His humor was sharp, measured, and rooted in observation. Night after night, he refined his voice. He spoke about daily life, human habits, and quiet contradictions. Audiences leaned in rather than sat back. Laughter came not in explosions, but in steady waves. It was the sound of recognition. The New York comedy scene of that time was crowded and competitive. Many performers chased quick fame. Mulrooney focused on craft. Fellow comedians noticed. One peer from those early days later said, "John treated comedy like a job you respected. He showed up prepared. He believed jokes mattered." That belief carried him beyond club stages. His work led to opportunities in television, including appearances on Comedy Tonight. The transition was not easy. Television demanded timing, structure, and discipline. Mulrooney adapted without losing his voice. He learned how to shape humor for broader audiences while keeping its core honest. Behind the scenes, he became a prolific writer and producer. His name was not always in the spotlight, but his influence was present. Scripts carried his sense of rhythm. Segments reflected his understanding of people. He helped build moments others would perform. One of the most public moments of his career came with Star Search. The competition brought exposure, pressure, and expectation. Mulrooney did not win. For some, that loss might have ended momentum. For him, it quietly reshaped his path. In later interviews, he rarely spoke about disappointment. Instead, he spoke about work. A colleague once recalled him saying, "If you keep writing, you're still in it." The loss did not define him. It redirected him. As opportunities shifted, Mulrooney relocated to Los Angeles. The move was not framed as a fresh start, but as a continuation. In Los Angeles, he became a steady presence at legendary comedy venues. He performed, wrote, and collaborated. He watched new generations come up, just as he once had. Los Angeles offered different energy. The rooms were larger. The industry was closer. Mulrooney remained himself. He did not chase headlines. He did not reshape his humor to fit trends. He stayed grounded in observation and timing. Younger comedians often sought his advice. He did not give long speeches. He offered simple guidance. One performer later shared online, "John told me to trust the joke and respect the audience." That stayed with me. His career became defined not by peak moments, but by consistency. Year after year, he showed up. He wrote. He performed. He contributed. Comedy was not a phase in his life. It was his life. Away from the stage, Mulrooney valued privacy. He was known to be thoughtful, reserved, and generous with his time. Friends described him as someone who noticed when others struggled. He checked in quietly. He listened. Social media reactions after his passing reflected that side of him. One post read, "John Mulrooney didn't just make rooms laugh. He made people feel seen." Another said, "He was never loud about his impact, but it was everywhere." As December 29, 2025, arrived, his passing was shared with restraint. No dramatic statements followed. The focus remained on the life he lived, not the moment it ended. He left behind decades of work that continued to speak for him. In comedy circles, the loss felt personal. Clubs dimmed their lights. Performers mentioned his name in quiet tributes. His influence appeared in stories told backstage rather than on stage. Comedy, as Mulrooney practiced it, was not about escape. It was about endurance. It helped people carry heavy days a little more lightly. It offered relief without denial. His jokes did not ask audiences to forget life. They invited them to face it together. A fellow writer summed it up simply, "John believed laughter was something you earned, not demanded." That belief shaped his entire career. As the years pass, his name may not always appear in bold headlines. Yet his presence remains in the rhythm of jokes, the patience of delivery, and the respect for audience intelligence. These are lessons that outlast applause. John Mulrooney's life reminds us that not all legacies are built on fame. Some are built on showing up, paying attention, and doing the work well. He offered laughter as a form of service, night after night, without asking for more than the chance to speak honestly. In the end, his work continues where it always lived. In rooms made lighter. In moments of shared understanding. In the quiet truth that humor, when handled with care, can help people endure. And so, he is remembered not for a single moment, but for a lifetime of them. A craftsman of comedy. A steady voice. A man who found truth through laughter, and left it behind for others to find again. The confirmation came quietly, carried in short statements and muted headlines. On January 4, 2026, Michael Edward Reagan passed away, closing a life lived under one of the most recognized names in American history. The news did not arrive with drama, but with reflection. Michael Edward Reagan was born John Charles Flower in 1945. His early life changed course when he was adopted by Ronald Reagan and Jane Wyman. From that moment forward, his identity was shaped by both belonging and distance. He was part of a famous family, yet always separate from the image the world already understood. Growing up in the shadow of public figures brought attention, but also pressure. Expectations formed early and followed him into adulthood. He learned that a famous name opens doors, but also removes privacy. For Michael Reagan, the challenge was not avoiding the legacy, but finding a place within it. Unlike his father, he did not seek elected office. Politics interested him, but power did not define his ambition. Instead, he chose words. Commentary became his path, and radio became his stage. Through talk shows and columns, he built a career based on opinion, interpretation, and belief. Listeners came to recognize his voice. It was firm, clear, and confident. He spoke as a conservative commentator, addressing policy, leadership, and national direction. His work did not aim to rewrite history, but to respond to it. Over time, Reagan became a familiar presence in Republican media. He was not positioned as a symbol, but as a participant. His role was that of an interpreter, someone explaining values shaped by both personal experience and inherited history. His long association with Newsmax marked a steady chapter in his career. As a columnist, he wrote about politics, leadership, and public responsibility. His writing reflected conviction, but also loyalty. The past was never far from his words, yet he spoke from his own place within it. A colleague from Newsmax once said, "Michael didn't pretend to be something else. He spoke as himself, and he stood by what he believed." That consistency defined his public life. Behind the certainty of his opinions lived a more complex personal story. Family relationships, public expectations, and private struggles often intersected. He did not hide disagreement, nor did he avoid difficult conversations. His life unfolded in public view, even when the matters were deeply personal. For many, Michael Reagan represented continuity. He carried a familiar last name into a changing political era. Yet he never claimed ownership of his father's achievements. Instead, he treated the legacy as something to be respected, not possessed. Listeners and readers often responded to his sense of duty. Social media reactions after his passing reflected this view. One message read, "Michael Reagan believed in standing firm, even when it wasn't easy." Another wrote, "He carried history without pretending it was his alone." His commentary career lasted decades, not because of controversy, but because of consistency. He returned to the microphone day after day. He wrote column after column. His work was steady, not sudden. As political landscapes shifted, his voice remained recognizable. He addressed modern issues through the lens of long-held beliefs. Supporters valued his clarity. Critics acknowledged his commitment. He accepted both as part of public life. Private moments rarely appeared in his work. He spoke more about ideas than emotions. Yet those close to him described a man shaped by loyalty and persistence. Family members remembered him as someone who carried responsibility seriously. One family acquaintance later shared, "Michael always felt the weight of the name, but he never ran from it." That weight shaped his choices, his tone, and his sense of purpose. When news of his passing spread on January 4, 2026, reactions remained measured. There were no calls for debate, no reopening of old arguments. Instead, there was recognition of a long career spent engaging with the national conversation. In radio studios and newsrooms, his absence was noticed. A familiar voice had gone quiet. For those who followed his work, it marked the end of a chapter that spanned generations. Michael Reagan's life invites reflection on legacy itself. Some inherit power. Others inherit expectation. He inherited history, and chose how to carry it forward. He did not escape the past, nor did he live entirely within it. He stood beside it, responding through words rather than authority. his career showed that legacy is not a finished story, but an ongoing dialogue. As time moves on, his work remains where it always lived. In recordings, in columns, and in conversations shaped by his commentary. He leaves behind not monuments, but perspective. In the end, Michael Edward Reagan is remembered as a man who spoke his beliefs clearly and lived within the complexity of his name. He demonstrated that inheritance does not end choice, and that identity is formed not only by origin, but by action. His story closes not with controversy, but with continuity. A life shaped by history, expressed through words, and released with dignity. And in that quiet passing, his legacy finds its final form, not as a symbol, but as a voice remembered. The news surfaced gently, shared first in close circles before reaching the wider public. On January 3, 2026, Brett Hanna-Shuford passed away in Orlando, Florida. The announcement carried little detail, and that quiet matched the way he lived much of his life. Brett Hanna-Shuford was an actor shaped not by sudden fame, but by discipline. He grew up in Texas, where his early interest in performance was guided by structure and study. Theater, for him, was not about attention. It was about learning how to stand within a group and serve a story. His path led him to New York, where training demanded patience and resilience. Long rehearsals, shared stages, and small roles formed the core of his craft. He became known among peers as someone who prepared deeply and listened closely. One former castmate later said, "Brett showed up ready to work. He cared about the room, not just his part." In New York theater, ensemble mattered more than applause. Hanna-Shuford embraced that culture fully. He understood that performance was a shared responsibility. Each actor supported the other, and success belonged to the whole cast. As his career developed, opportunities appeared across stage and screen. His appearance in The Wolf of Wall Street introduced him to a broader audience. Yet that moment was never treated as a finish line. It was one chapter among many, not a definition. Those who knew him noted how little his attitude changed with recognition. He continued to train, rehearse, and collaborate. A friend later reflected online, "Brett never acted like a role made him complete. He believed the work was ongoing." Beyond performance, Hanna-Shuford became deeply invested in community. He co-founded Broadway Husbands, a platform that blended traditional theater values with digital storytelling. What began as creative expression grew into a space of connection. Broadway Husbands offered visibility, humor, and honesty. It gave voice to LGBTQ+ artists navigating both public and private lives. The platform did not chase spectacle. It focused on authenticity and shared experience. One follower wrote after his passing, "Broadway Husbands made me feel less alone." Brett helped build that. Messages like this reflected impact that could not be measured by credits alone. Hanna-Shuford understood the balance between spotlight and self. He lived in that space carefully. Visibility brought responsibility, and he treated it with care. His work reminded others that identity could be expressed without performance becoming a mask. In private life, he valued calm and connection. Friends described him as thoughtful and generous with encouragement. He celebrated others' successes without comparison. His mentorship often happened quietly, in conversations rather than speeches. As news of his passing spread, many respected the request for privacy. There was no speculation, no public explanation. The focus remained on his life, not its ending. The theater community responded with warmth and restraint. Stages dimmed. Words were shared in rehearsal rooms and online posts. One tribute read, "Brett built spaces where people felt safe to be themselves." That is a rare gift. His legacy lives not only in performances, but in people. In artists who felt supported. In viewers who felt seen. In communities that grew stronger because he helped shape them. Brett Hanna-Shuford's story reflects a different kind of success. not one marked by constant visibility, but by lasting influence. He showed that art could be both disciplined and kind. As time moves forward, his presence remains in shared laughter, honest storytelling, and quiet mentorship. He leaves behind a reminder that some of the most meaningful work happens away from center stage. And so he is remembered as an artist who chose care over noise, and community over acclaim. A life lived between spotlight and self, leaving behind spaces that feel warmer, safer, and more human.